You think you've been choosing love. But what if I told you you've been choosing a wound? You're a man who shows up. You try to be strong, responsible, grounded. You've worked hard to become what you were told a man should be. But behind every heartbreak, behind the quiet confusion that rises when things fall apart again, is a question you've never dared to ask. Was she ever really whole to begin with? You've met her. Maybe you loved her. Maybe you still do. The woman whose beauty seemed to light the room, who needed you, pulled you in, told you she'd never been understood until now. You thought it was fate. It felt electric, but it left you depleted, confused, twisted in 1,000 emotional knots. And deep inside, something in you whispered, "This isn't love. This is a game I don't know the rules to." Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." What if I told you that some women, many in fact, are doing exactly that? Not consciously, not maliciously, but chronically. They wear the mask of the woman, but inside they are still girls, arrested in their development, untouched by self-confrontation, terrified of adulthood. Jung saw her clearly. He called her the puella eterna, the eternal girl. And once you understand this archetype, your entire past will make sense. This video is not a criticism. It is a revelation, a mirror. Not for her, but for you. Because if you've ever loved someone who couldn't meet you in the present, who lived in emotional spirals, who needed saving, then you weren't in a relationship. You were in a myth, and you were cast as the rescuer. But what if I told you you were never meant to rescue her? You were meant to wake up. And that's what this is, your awakening. Now, let's go deeper. I studied her long before the modern world tried to disguise her behind curated photos and endless affirmations. She has existed for centuries, hidden beneath romance, charm, and fragility. I called her the puella eterna, the eternal girl, and many of you have loved her without knowing her name. She is not evil. She is not broken, but she is unfinished. She has not yet crossed the threshold into full womanhood. And so, she builds her life around fantasy, not reality, around emotional highs and magical thinking, around the hope that someone else will make the world safe so she never has to grow strong. This girl can be seductive, her energy playful, her presence light, her smile disarming. But when life demands depth, structure, and resilience, she collapses. She avoids confrontation, deflects responsibility, and escapes into drama. She is not anchored, not because she is wild, but because she has not rooted herself in the soil of her own soul. Behind every flirty message, every coy delay, every crisis that somehow becomes your fault, is the refusal to grow. She doesn't want to be responsible. She wants to be adored. But why? Because she learned early that being agreeable was safer than being real, that pleasing others brought love, that expressing rage, ambition, or assertiveness made her undesirable. So she split. She exiled her power. She hid her depth. She became a projection of what the world wanted, not a person rooted in her own truth. And here is the trap. You mistake her need for connection as intimacy. You mistake her chaos for passion. You call her emotionally vulnerable, when really she's emotionally undeveloped. You begin carrying her pain, adjusting your center, softening your truth. You become her therapist, her anchor, her stabilizer. And you think it's noble, but what it really is self-abandonment. She does not want to grow, not yet, because to grow would mean to grieve the girl she has clung to. It would mean stepping into discomfort, structure, boundaries, consequence. And unless she chooses that path willingly, you cannot lead her there. So ask yourself, are you with a woman who can stand in the fire of her own transformation? Or are you with someone waiting for you to do all the burning? One of you will have to face the truth. And if she won't, it must be you. You don't choose her because you're blind. You choose her because something in you is unresolved. There is a contract, silent, unwritten, and deeply unconscious, that binds you to the woman who refuses to grow. This isn't about blame. It's about recognition. You were taught, whether by a distant father or an overburdened mother, that your worth came from being needed, that love was something you earned by solving problems, by fixing others, by being the strong one when no one else knew how. So when you meet the eternal girl, something lights up in you. She doesn't ask you to be yourself. She asks you to save her. And that feels familiar, like home. But it is not home. It is a wound. You don't want a partner. You want to be a hero. And in trying to rescue her, you forget that you were never meant to carry what she refuses to hold. This is the unconscious agreement you keep signing. She agrees to remain small. You agree to feel needed. She avoids responsibility. You pick up the weight. She spins in chaos. You steady the ship. But the cost is staggering. You lose your edge. You silence your anger. You abandon your path just to keep her from falling apart. And the worst part? You call this love. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious seeks wholeness, not happiness. And so you will keep choosing women who mirror your unresolved mother complex, your need to be validated through sacrifice, your fear of being with someone who doesn't need you to be their savior. You don't just tolerate the emotional immaturity, you're drawn to it. Because it gives you a role. It makes you feel essential. But essential is not the same as free. Until you see this clearly, you will repeat the cycle. You'll keep mistaking dependency for connection. You'll confuse rescue with love. And you'll wonder why every relationship leaves you drained, resentful, and unsure of who you are anymore. But there is a way out. You must begin to recognize your own pattern. You must realize that your urge to rescue is not strength. It is a defense, a way to avoid your own unmet needs by focusing entirely on hers. Until you confront this truth, you will continue handing your soul to women who don't know how to hold it. You do not need to be needed to be worthy. You do not have to carry her to prove your strength. You only need to choose truth over fantasy. And that choice begins now. You think you're strong because you stay, because you endure the emotional roller coasters, absorb the blame, fix the broken pieces. You think this makes you loyal, resilient, noble. But ask yourself, at what cost? Staying with the woman who refuses to grow doesn't just take your time. It takes your clarity, your focus, your very sense of self. You wake up in a fog of confusion, wondering why you're exhausted even when nothing's happened. You overthink simple conversations, constantly trying to read between the lines. You walk on eggshells, trying not to trigger the next emotional storm. And little by little, you become smaller. Less expressive, less decisive, less you. This is not love. This is slow erosion. Carl Jung warned us that anything you don't bring into consciousness will continue to rule your life as fate. And this is exactly what happens when you stay with someone who hasn't met their own unconscious. You carry what they've refused to face. Her emotional chaos becomes your responsibility. Her inner child becomes your daily caretaker. Her mood swings dictate your peace. You become the stabilizer, the anchor, the adult in a two-person dynamic where only one is willing to evolve. And you convince yourself this is strength. But it's not. It's self-abandonment dressed as commitment. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to tell where she ends and you begin. You lose your voice trying to keep the peace. You mute your truth so she doesn't feel confronted. You dull your purpose because she finds your clarity threatening. This is the cost. You forget what you were building. You forget what your life was about before it became about fixing hers. And eventually, you forget who you were before you started shrinking to keep her comfortable. The man you were born to be begins to fade. Not because you lack potential, but because you've spent all your energy protecting someone else's illusions instead of building your own reality. And here is the brutal truth. She doesn't even realize the damage she's causing. Because she hasn't done the work. She's not malicious. She's unconscious. But that doesn't make the damage any less real. You weren't built to orbit someone else's unresolved childhood. You were built to lead, to create, to rise. And you can't do that while playing emotional parent to someone who refuses to grow up. You think leaving is cruel. But what's cruel is becoming a ghost in your own life. Jung would say, the man who sacrifices himself to keep the peace externally will eventually create a war within. And that war, if left unacknowledged, becomes depression, resentment, even rage. So ask yourself, what have you already given up to stay in this dynamic? And more importantly, how much more of yourself are you willing to lose before you finally walk away? She doesn't do it consciously. She doesn't say, "Here, take my wounds, my fear, my unfinished past." But she hands it to you nonetheless, not with words, but with behavior, with silence, with neediness masked as love, with chaos disguised as passion. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is everything we reject in ourselves. Not just the dark, violent parts, but the vulnerable, messy, frightened parts too. And when someone refuses to face their shadow, it doesn't disappear. It just spills out onto the people closest to them. You. She may seem light-hearted, playful, carefree. But underneath that persona lives the storm she won't acknowledge. The fear of abandonment, the shame she never processed, the anger she doesn't even know is there. And when you come close, when you try to truly connect, those things wake up. Suddenly, you're not her partner. You're her father, her therapist, her emotional shock absorber. And every time you try to set a boundary, it's met with resistance. Every time you name a truth, it's called an attack. You begin to walk a tightrope of emotional management, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid triggering her unspoken wounds. But here's what Jung would tell you. Those wounds are not yours. And yet, you carry them. You carry her need to be rescued, her fear of being alone, her resentment toward a world that never taught her emotional discipline. You carry it in your silence, your self-censorship, your internal exhaustion. And if you've ever wondered why you feel more tired around her, more reactive, more emotionally unstable, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're holding what isn't yours to hold. Jung's warning was clear. What we don't face within, we meet without. That's not just true for her, it's true for you. If you have not met your own inner feminine, your own anima, you'll be seduced by the external expression of it. And worse, you'll try to rescue it, thinking you're being loving, when in reality, you're just avoiding your own healing by focusing on hers. This is the trap. You're carrying a shadow that doesn't belong to you, and in doing so, your own shadow grows. You begin to suppress your truth to maintain the connection. You begin to feel guilty for needing space, needing clarity, needing respect. You confuse love with sacrifice. But love does not require you to abandon yourself. When a woman hasn't done her shadow work, she becomes an unconscious vortex. Charming, yes, but dangerous, not because she's evil, but because she is unmoored. And anyone who gets too close becomes her anchor, or worse, her mirror. And if you dare to reflect back what she refuses to see, she will push you away, then blame you for leaving. So you must ask yourself, as Jung would demand, are you in love with this woman, or are you entangled with her shadow? Because the longer you stay in her unconscious story, the more your own gets lost. And at some point, a man must choose, carry her shadow or meet your own. You wanted to be her strength, didn't you? To be the one she could finally trust, the one who wouldn't leave, the one who would prove that love doesn't have to hurt. But in trying to be her savior, you abandoned the man you were becoming. Carl Jung warned us. When you protect someone from their shadow, you also protect them from transformation. You thought you were helping, but you weren't. You were delaying her evolution and dismantling your own. You began to edit yourself to keep the peace. You stayed silent when her words cut deep. You made excuses when her behavior was erratic, blaming stress or past trauma. You carried her guilt, her confusion, her emotional volatility. You adjusted your truth to make room for her fragility. But every time you softened your voice, every time you absorbed her storm instead of demanding clarity, you lost a part of your own spine. And you called it love. This is the quiet erosion of masculine power. Not the kind of power that dominates, but the kind that protects its own center. The power that sets boundaries, that says, I will walk with you, but I will not carry you. Because if she refuses to grow, to confront her unfinished wounds, she will unconsciously demand that you do it for her. And you'll mistake that for intimacy, for connection, for purpose. But this is not purpose. It is emotional parenthood. And it will drain you, not in dramatic bursts, but in the slow, silent leak of your focus, your mission, your inner fire. You'll start to second-guess yourself. You'll feel guilty for wanting space. You'll question your sanity when she flips the story and turns your need for peace into abandonment. You'll lose sight of your direction because all of your energy is spent managing her turbulence. Jung said, "A man who has not confronted his own inner feminine will be manipulated by it in the outside world." And here it is. You are being manipulated, not maliciously but unconsciously, by a woman who hasn't integrated herself. You don't need to shame her, but you do need to see clearly. You do not serve the feminine by enabling her avoidance. You do not honor love by betraying your boundaries. And you cannot lead if you are constantly rescuing. You may think staying is noble, that your devotion will one day heal her. But here's the brutal truth. As long as you are her emotional savior, she has no reason to grow. And as long as you stay in that role, neither do you. Love does not demand that you collapse. Real love calls both people into expansion, into truth, into wholeness. So the question is not whether she's worthy of love. The question is, can she stand beside you as a woman, or only remain beneath you as a wounded girl? And are you finally ready to stop confusing sacrifice with strength? Because you were not built to carry someone else's soul at the cost of your own. Masculine power is not found in dominance, nor in suppression. It is not the loudest voice in the room, nor the man who takes up the most space. True power, as I have always said, is rooted in consciousness, in the clarity of knowing who you are, without needing the world to agree. A man who possesses real power does not seek to control the feminine. He does not rescue it. He does not fear its chaos. He stands rooted in himself, unshaken, not because he is indifferent, but because he is integrated. Real masculine energy, in its highest form, does not react. It responds. You've been taught that your strength comes from sacrifice, from staying, from enduring emotional storms in the name of love. But that is not strength. That is a misunderstanding of your sacred role. Strength is in knowing when to walk away. Strength is in saying, "I will not betray myself to be accepted." Strength is in setting a boundary, not out of anger, but out of love for your own center. This is where most men falter. They confuse usefulness with worth. They believe that being needed makes them valuable. But being needed is not the same as being respected. And being chased is not the same as being chosen. Jungian psychology teaches us that wholeness arises when the masculine and feminine meet as equals, within you first, then with another. If your inner feminine is wounded, rejected, or idealized, you will project that wound onto the women you meet. You will chase their approval. You will mistake emotional volatility for depth. You will confuse sexual intensity with spiritual intimacy. But once you integrate your own inner feminine, you no longer chase her externally. You no longer collapse under her storm. You no longer bleed for the sake of proving your love. You become the man who stands in silence and commands presence, not by force, but by the way you protect your energy, the way you move with intention, the way you refuse to perform for validation. Power is not noise. It is not chaos. It is the calm center around which everything else revolves. That is what the world needs now, not more wounded men trying to fix wounded women, but whole men who live from depth. Men who choose their values over their vices, their clarity over their chemistry, their mission over their mirroring. So ask yourself, where is your energy going? Is it building something lasting or leaking into someone else's unresolved past? Are you creating a future or repeating a cycle? Because your power, your real power, was never meant to be spent trying to stabilize the instability of another. It was meant to shape a life built on purpose, presence, and inner peace. And until you reclaim that, no relationship, no matter how passionate, will ever feel like home. There comes a moment in every man's life when the illusion cracks, the fog lifts, and he sees, not her, not them, but himself. That moment is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is quiet, a still knowing that says, I've been giving my strength to what weakens me. Perhaps that moment is now. You look back at the women you've loved, the ones you've chased, the ones you've tried to fix. You no longer feel anger, only clarity. You see how often you called emotional chaos passion, how many times you confused being needed with being loved. You remember all the times you swallowed your truth to avoid her storm, all the times you became her stability while she remained your uncertainty. But now something inside you says no more. Not because you hate her, not because you judge her, but because you finally love yourself more than the performance, because you finally recognize that protecting your center is not weakness, it is wisdom. Carl Jung taught that the soul longs for wholeness, and to be whole, a man must stop outsourcing his value. He must withdraw his projections. He must see the eternal girl not as a mystery, not as an enemy, but as a mirror of the places he still hasn't grown. Once you see this, you can no longer go back. You can no longer pretend. You no longer confuse drama with desire or performance with depth. You no longer collapse into roles: therapist, father, savior. You become what you were always meant to be, a man who leads not others, but himself. This is the part no one tells you. When you rise in consciousness, you lose access to the unconscious patterns that once felt like love. They no longer fit. They no longer excite you, because you're no longer running from your own inner feminine. You've turned toward her, integrated her, and in doing so, you no longer seek her healing through someone else. The woman who once captivated you now reveals herself, not as a soulmate, but as a symbol of your own fragmentation. And now that you're whole, the spell breaks. And here comes the freedom. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer explain your worth, you embody it. You no longer seek to be seen, you see yourself. You will meet women again. But now you'll see through the mask. You'll recognize the ones who perform maturity and the ones who have earned it. You'll honor the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between being mirrored and being matched. And when you meet a woman who has met herself, who has danced with her shadow, who owns her fire, who no longer needs you to be her savior, you will not feel needed. You will feel seen. And that, my friend, is the only kind of woman worth your time. Now, if this message found you at the right moment, it means you're ready. So write this in the comments. I lead myself now. Not for me, not for her, but for you. And if you want to keep walking this path, subscribe. This isn't entertainment, it's evolution. And no man walks it alone. Power is not how loud your voice is. It's how silent your center remains when chaos surrounds you. You were taught that masculinity means control, dominance, strength. But Carl Jung showed us another path, a deeper path, a sacred masculinity that does not dominate but discerns, that does not conquer but integrates. The modern man is starving, not for success, not for admiration, but for depth, for roots, for clarity. And you will not find those things by following the crowd. You will not find them in conquest or validation. You will find them in silence, in the places you've been avoiding, in the truths you've been afraid to name. The most dangerous man is not the one who controls others. It is the one who cannot be controlled, because he knows who he is. You become him, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming whole. You reclaim the fire you gave away. You see the mask you wore, and you drop it. You stop begging the world to reflect your worth, and start living from it. You begin to lead your mind, guard your energy, set boundaries without guilt, walk away without collapsing. That is the masculine reborn. Not in armor, but in awareness. Not in domination, but in devotion, to truth, to clarity, to your own soul. And from this place, you no longer fear the feminine. You no longer collapse into it or try to control it. You meet it, fully, with reverence, with strength, with self-possession. This is the man you were meant to become, and the world needs him now more than ever. So let this be your return to your clarity, your sovereignty, your truth, to the path of individuation, of integration, of masculine consciousness finally made whole. And if any part of this stirred something in you, leave a sign in the comments so others know they are not alone. And subscribe, not for more content, but to keep remembering who you are. The path is long, but you don't walk it alone. I'll see you on the road, seeker.